This is a figure, a sculpture that was found in early Europe, and one of the things that they have discovered is that many of the sculptures of early Europe show various African types. In fact, 55,000 years ago, according to 3 labs, the University of Oxford, the University of Hawaii, the University of California at Berkeley have come to the conclusion that there are no people on the earth 55,000 years ago who are not black Africans. World-renowned professors, and after 2 years you began to realize it was easy to become a world-renowned professor because all you had to do was to pick out something that nobody else picked out. And the only way to do that is to find an irrelevant, insignificant tribe. We all pick tribes, okay? If a tribe is vanishing and it is very far and it is in the deeps of the jungle or the desert and nobody wants to go there for a year, you pick it out. You'll be the world famous professor because you would be an expert on the wooga booga. Because nobody gives a damn about wooga boogas. And we have thousands of studies like that, and these people try to extrapolate from these little simplicities what is essentially and quintessentially African. And you cannot do that.
She looks a lot like a Maasai woman. Her name is Anut Tawi, and that's also 18th dynasty. This is Amenhotep III, the father of King Tut. This is Amenhotep III's wife.
Can you go back to
Yes, we'll go back to Amenhotep III.
Yes. This is who now?
This is King Tut's father. And also Pharaoh Akhenaten's father, the founder of monotheism. Some people think he's the founder. Yeah. That's not true, but monotheism is older than Akhenaten. That's another program. So this is Amenhotep III. This is Amenhotep III's wife, Queen T. Again, this was a queen that they could easily project just like Nefertiti, but no one ever sees her.
Where are these images? In the textbooks, etc.? They're
not in the textbooks. They're in the Cairo Museum, in the archives. But and she was a very important queen. Now, this is Akhenaten, the son of that king and queen, who became pharaoh and developed a brand new religion and took Egypt in a different direction. This is his wife, Nefertiti. Now you can see why she becomes so famous. When you compare her to Nefertari or to Queen T, she looks more, she has more of the image of a European. She, in fact, according to historians, was Persian. And that she was supposed to marry Pharaoh Akhenaten's father, but he died before Akhenaten, before she could get to Egypt, and so she married the son, Akhenaten, instead. Now, even though she was Persian, the chances are that she was still African in the sense of race, as shown on this tomb of hers. That's also Nefertiti. Let me show Nefertiti here, and let's look at her tomb. Now, this picture of Nefertiti, we don't even know is Nefertiti for sure. It was found on the floor of an artist's workshop. But this is the most famous image of Kemet anywhere in the world.
You say artist's workshop, or artist where?
In Kemet.
Oh, in Egypt, okay.
In Egypt, yes. Okay, then we have, this is the material that I was quoting, showing that, according to Moray, she was actually Persian, the daughter of a Persian king, rather than Egyptian. These are the daughters of Pharaoh Akhenaten and Nefertiti. They were said to be deformed because they have long heads. In other words, they were not normal Europeans, according to the people who said that. But here are Africans all over Africa who have the same head shape. In other words, that's the most typical head shape that you find in the African population. That's from East Africa and also from West Africa. Okay, here is King Tut, who was the brother of Akhenaten. This is the golden mask. Keep this image in mind when I show you the next slide, because the next slide will be a picture of a news advertisement for the King Tut exhibit in Los Angeles, coming out of the Los Angeles Times.
Okay.
I want you to show you the real thing, then I want to show you what an artist does, and that will give you an indication of why we should never accept artist sketches. We should always ask for the original document or the original carving if we can possibly see it. So here's King Tut the way he looked to his artist. Here's King Tut the way he looked to the artist in the Los Angeles Times. He's become Caucasoid. And we go back, take a look at the way he really looked, and then this is how he looked in the advertisement at the...
he becomes white.
He becomes white. And this happens frequently with the Egyptian figures as they appear in sketches. And this is the reason that we recommend against the use of sketches in textbooks, and wherever possible we ought to have photographs, and even better than that, we ought to have the actual object, because even in photographs, it's possible that the color is not a true rendition of the color, as I indicated with Queen T. In black and white, you really don't pick up the natural color of the statue as it appears, and it's really better to have a color picture. And then, of course, look at what's happened to King Tut by the time it gets to the children. So let's go back and look at this again. We start out with the golden mask, the way he looks. This is the way the adult population will pick it up in the advertisement in the newspaper. And this is how we will tell the children about King Tut.
So this is an example of what?
This is an example of actually changing history to deny to African people their own history and to give that African history to someone else.
Research and other research. And that is why Egypt had to be claimed by the Europeans. That's why the Europeans had to make Egypt a European country, a white country, in spite of the fact. In spite of the fact. But you, in trying to become and make yourself equal, everything got to be equal. I'm not equal to nobody. I am it. You cannot come to me to learn mathematics, and I gave the world 1 to 9. When the world didn't have anything, I was counting. I had a written language I call Medu-Neter, the writing of the gods. There was no Greece and no Etrusca and no Pyrrhus yet. That later became Rome and Greece. When I was going into chemistry, I left my writing in 100 of them that now they even call the Rockefeller Papyrus, the Edwin C. Smith Medical Papyrus. This Edwin C. Smith is a surgical papyrus dealing with the operation in the human spine, 1700 BC, 700 years before Rome or Greece. By pregnancy, and our scientists, our doctors, our physicians, chemists developed a method to stop pregnancy and still could enjoy our intercourse, and was made from a shrub of acacia and honey, which break down into lactic acid. Try it in your chemistry class next time and see if I am telling a lie. Now, when we're dealing with that, that's 1550 BC. What that is before Adam and Eve is mentioned anywhere. There's no book dealing with any Adam and Eve yet. When you think of that, that we are doing, there is no Greece yet. And he claimed the creation of Rome and Greece. I can do more in proving to you that Rome and Greece was not Europe than anybody else can prove that Egypt was not Africa. Rome and Greece was not Europe. Two Mediterranean-inspired nations, because when they rose, there was no Europe. That's hard on your imagination. What created Europe? the challenge of Rome and Greece. Fighting Rome and Greece, they got themselves together to fight it or try to destroy it. Getting themselves together to fight this challenge made them a nation. They began to have facsimile nations, and they weren't even clear on the nation concept in Europe until near the end of the 18th and the 19th century. And you actually go, here's the people who came into the world civilized. And Europe was born when the ancient world was ending at the beginning of the modern world. There was no Europe in ancient times.
We just have to be very careful, and this is something that happens in all movements, not to claim that everything is black. That is not necessary. The contributions of the black to the world are so great in terms of what we know now that it is not necessary to claim things that are not necessarily true. In the field of medicine, for example, they have found incredible things. They found vaccines among Africans long before Edwin Jenner. They found the smallpox vaccine had been brought to this country by Onesimus, a slave of Cotton Mather. They found that the Africans were using aspirin long before the Western nations, that the Bantu were using Salix capensis, which yields salicylic acid, the main active ingredient in aspirin. They found the Africans had made breakthroughs in eye cataract surgery in the 13th century. Africans were performing eye cataract surgery in the Empire of Mali, in the city of Djenné. Nobody in the world was performing eye cataract surgery at the time. And there were certain surgeries in Africa which taught surgeries which had a profound effect on surgery in Europe. In the 1870s, whenever the Caesarean operation was performed, the Caesarean section was performed in women, the woman invariably died in Europe. Because of the British Empire, the British learned that Africans were performing the Caesarean successfully. A team under Dr. Felkin went out to East Africa among the Banyoro surgeons to study how they were performing this operation. They noted, please note, that the Africans had developed their own anesthetics and their own antiseptics. Antiseptics had only been introduced in an European operating theater by Lister 2 years earlier than the witness of this operation. Many doctors in Europe did not know, as late as the 1870s, that even if you perform a successful operation, your hands, the poison in your fingertips will kill the patient. They did not have proper antiseptics. They washed their hands in water. They found the Africans were using sterile antiseptics. They saw how they cut. They saw how they collapsed the abdominal wall. They saw how they took the baby out. They saw how they were able to take the cautery iron and stop internal bleeding almost instantly with minor tissue damage. They saw how the Africans stitched. They drew the stitches. They brought it back to Europe. And the Caesarean operation after that was performed with far greater success. Nobody knows, unless you study the history of medicine, that that was what happened. And so, how could you compare Sumer with Egypt? Ur, Lagash, and those places, those were city-states. They did not have the centralized network, the empire that the Egyptians created. And look at their writing system, the cuneiform tablets, the merchant bills and notes. They did not have the great literature of the Egyptians. Where is their literature compared to the literature of the Egyptians? The thousands of things that we have found even today in spite of the devastation. And look at their architecture. Who could compare the architecture of the Egyptians with the Sumerians? We cannot even reconstruct the Mesopotamian temple when the Egyptian works stand immortal upon the face of the earth. When the Sphinx, when the Great Pyramid was finished and it had its polished limestone casing, they say it was like a star over the earth. You could stand for hundreds of miles and see it shining. What is there in Sumer and in Babylon like that? They say the stone that was involved in the building of the Great Pyramid could build 30 Empire State Buildings. If you were to cut it into 1-foot cubes, it would encircle 2/3 of the belly of this planet. What are they talking about? And you look at all these things, you look at the medical documents you find in those Edwin Smith papyri, helminthiasis, ophthalmology, gynecology, pregnancy diagnosis, many things, studies of the pulse, studies in diagnostic percussion, fractures of the clavicle, dislocation in the mandible. Word for word, Hippocrates takes out the fractures of the clavicle and dislocation in the mandible and puts it in his work. And he's the father of medicine. Dynasty. But where are the books, they say? The earliest books in the world are African. The Book of the Dead, or rather it should be called the Book of the Coming Forth by Night and Day. The pyramid texts, the Papyrus of Ani. You will hear tomorrow from Dr. Ben the profound impact of those books upon the thinking of the Greeks. Look at the medical literature of the world. They said the clinical method began with the Greeks. It did not. You can read the Edwin Smith papyrus, Dr. Finch, whom you will hear tomorrow. Dr. Finch has done a commentary recently for the journal on the Edwin Smith papyrus, showing it is only 1/3 of an earlier manuscript written down in the 18th dynasty by a surgeon in Egypt, and that it only deals with the head and neck and the brain. Yet there are 200 terms. There are 200 medical terms for things inside and outside the head. He said that they discovered in that very early time things which we only know today through X-rays. He said that they found the locus in the brain through which auditory information is processed. They were working on pulse taking 1,000 years before Herophilus, the Greek who was credited with pulse taking.
He said that, he became more alert and more human being. He became more, you see, Malone became a more human being. Not just human being, you became a more yourself. You achieve your destiny when you go to Kemet school. You became a human being, more human. We are a human being already, but more human being. That means more wise. And when you go to Kemet school, when Plato himself compared what they do in Kemet school, I give Greek because it will be no debate. You see, it's our school in Greece, the way we are doing things is just for creatures like pigs. You see, like pigs. You see, and he said, myself, I'm ashamed. Myself as a Plato, I'm ashamed. We do things like that, is a shame. And also, not only for myself, for all Greek, the Greek world is a shame. What we can do, our education, when you compare with Kemet, is not even for human beings, it's just for pigs, for animals.
This is problem number 51, which gives you the formula for finding the area of a triangle, 1/2 base times height. So this is relatively basic geometry. Next slide, please. But problem number 56 is something else. Problem number 56, let me see if I can, actually, it might be better if I get my glasses on and actually read this a little bit. Yes. Problem number 56 in the Rin mathematical papyrus, that's the one you see up there, seeks to find the slope of a pyramid whose height is 250 cubits and whose base is 360 cubits. The answer is 5 1/25 palms for each cubit in height, representing the cotangent of the angle of the slope of the pyramid's face. Now, if you've got a cotangent, if you can find cotangents, you know the way you can find tangents is that you flip the cotangent over. It's the inverse of a tangent. The other thing too, just look at that. Imagine that that pyramid is three-dimensional, because that's what it's supposed to be. Now, all you really have to do is inscribe a triangle inside that pyramid. A right triangle whose height is also the same as the height of the pyramid. Therefore, the face becomes the hypotenuse. And half of the pyramid's base becomes the base of that right triangle, and then the height of the pyramid becomes the height of the right triangle. When you have all that in place, and it's really just a matter of drawing it in, you then can find sine and cosine. So now, if they have the tangent and cotangent and the ability to find sine and cosine, by definition, they have trigonometry. Now, the reason why I make that point is because every historian of science tells you that trigonometry wasn't invented until Hipparchus did 1,500 years later. Now, you see, we're not just talking about rudimentary calculation. We are now moving into the realm of higher mathematics, the foundation of all mathematics. Next slide, please.
A man named Imhotep. Imhotep was recorded in history as the world's first multi-genius. He is a prime minister to Zoser. He was a poet, a philosopher, a physician. He is considered to be the author of the world's oldest medical treatise ever written. It is a document that is now called the Edwin Smith Medical Papyrus. This book describes 48 different injuries to the head, to the face, to the neck, and the spinal column. It is held in high regard by members of the International College of Surgeons in Chicago, and it is noted for its accuracy and high scientific standard. The architects and engineers of the Nile Valley were responsible for creating some of the most memorable structures on Earth. The Great Pyramid of Giza is the first and only remaining wonder of the original 7 wonders of the world. This magnificent structure stands as tall as a 45-story building and is comprised of nearly 2.5 million stone blocks, which weigh an average of 2.5 tons each. This one building is comprised of enough stone to make 30 Empire State Buildings. The temple complex of P.T.A.H, now called Karnak, was one of the greatest accomplishments ever achieved in Kemet. It is comprised of numerous temples, one of which contains the largest colonnaded hall ever constructed. This great hall consists of 136 columns, which stand in 16 rows. The tallest columns are 69 feet high and are large enough to accommodate a group of 100 men standing on its apex. This one room has enough floor space to equal the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, and the entire complex is large enough to accommodate all of the churches built in London since the birth of Jesus the Christ. The oldest rendering of a boat was also found in Kemet and was said to have been painted over 5,000 years ago. This 132-foot ship is one of the oldest boats ever discovered. It was with vessels such as this that the king Ka-Kepra-Ren Senrosret I crossed the Mediterranean Sea and founded the city of Athens in Greece around 1897 BCE. 1,000 years later, Africans successfully circumnavigated Africa and produced accurate maps of the continent. Nile Valley civilization is noted for a number of historical firsts, including writing, law, architecture, religion, and medicine, to name a few. But in 1972, the Cairo Museum showcased an object entitled the Glider of Saqqara, an ancient model of aeronautical engineering. It was described as a model of a monoplane with negative dihedral angled wings, not unlike those of the modern Hercules transport aircraft.
had to let it go. They couldn't do it. And they were not using 50-ton blocks, which the Egyptians put at the top of their skyscrapers. They were using 2-ton blocks of stone, and they couldn't do it. So make no mistake, you are dealing with extraordinary people. Because the next myth coming up in the 21st century is how the Japanese are the superior people of the world. It's going to shift from the European to the Asiatic. So get it quite clear. In the very early stages of civilization, something very unusual happened. I was with my wife in Egypt last summer, and we went to Aswan. And I looked at a block, an obelisk, a stone obelisk which had been cut many centuries ago. And I looked at the way it had been cut, the perfection of the cut. I looked at the stone, and I wondered why they had abandoned this obelisk. They abandoned it, they said, because it had a flaw. And I looked carefully. It is true, my eyes are not what they used to be. I could not see this flaw, so I used my hands, which are extremely sensitive, and it had to be pointed out to me where the flaw was, and it was very clear to me it would have taken centuries for that flaw to really make a difference. But our people didn't play around with things. It had to be perfect. When the Japanese were building the pyramid, when they tried to put the stones in alignment, they cracked and broke and were badly scratched. When they went to check the stones that the Egyptians had put into alignment, 1/1000th of an inch accurate, not a single stone was scratched or cracked. You are dealing with people who felt you had to be as perfect as possible. Let us pray that those of us, our people who learn of their heritage, their ancestors, will not accept mediocrity as their standard.